still have quite a bit to do, and we don't want to delay any longer. The next item on the agenda, the program, is introduction of the speaker. That'll be done by Dr. Paul Ortiz. He's from the Sam Proctor Oral History Program.
Thank you so much. And it is such a great honor for us here in the city of Gainesville to be able to welcome into our community Dr. Larry Rivers, president of Fort Valley State University. It's truly a blessed day for our community. I wanted to start by thanking the Pleasant Street Historic Society for working so hard and so effectively and so collaboratively. There's so many different organizations and individuals in our community to preserve, to gather, and to promote history. It is so important, the work that you do, and I want to thank you for it. The taping of this event, and you'll notice that we have 2 cameras, and I also want to acknowledge my staff from the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. We are taping the event today, and so if you want a copy of that event, we will have a taped copy of that available for you in the future. And I'm sure after you hear what this gentleman has to say, you are going to want a tape of it. It is a real rare honor, a tremendous honor, to be able to introduce Dr. Larry Rivers, president of Fort Valley State University. Professor Rivers is one of the great historians of our time. For me personally, he has been a mentor, a colleague, and a friend. He is a man who's never too busy with his great administrative responsibilities at Fort Valley to answer an email, read a manuscript, offer critical feedback on a research topic, no matter how large or how small. To the history graduate students of my generation, Larry has been a source of constant inspiration. In his scholarship, he is a reminder that the pursuit of truth and justice are one and the same. Working in the grand traditions of John Hope Franklin and W.E.B. Du Bois, Dr. Rivers has placed African American history at the center of the American narrative where it belongs. Equally important, he has demonstrated that the poorest of the poor, the most oppressed of the oppressed, and the most hated of the hated made history in their own right. In his great book, Slavery in Florida, Dr. Rivers argued the point that enslaved African Americans carried out the largest slave rebellion in the history of this country. Let me repeat that again. Enslaved African Americans in the state of Florida carried out the largest slave rebellion in the history of this country in the heart of the Second Seminole War. Published in 2000, Slavery in Florida is now universally acknowledged as the standard work in its field. But wait, there's more. Larry contacted me a few months ago and asked me to read his forthcoming manuscript and really honored me by asking me to write a book jacket blurb for his forthcoming book titled Rebels and Runaways, Slave Resistance in 19th Century Florida. I began reading this manuscript one Saturday afternoon and did not finish until I'd read the final footnote. It was absolutely riveting. This newest book is going to change the way we think about American history, Florida history, and African American history generally. This is what I wrote for the book jacket blurb. And I don't usually quote myself, please bear with me. It's kind of embarrassing. What I said about this is Rebels and Runaways is the most important study of African American slave rebellions since the publication of Herbert Aptheker's Negro Slave Revolts in 1943. Larry Rivers does for the history of slave resistance in the United States what C.L.R. James's Black Jacobins did for the Haitian Revolution. Dr. Rivers faithfully portrays the aspirations of enslaved Africans in Florida with sensitivity, and he opens a new chapter in the history of slave revolutions in the Americas. This book will have a profound impact on the field for generations to come. Now, Larry's contributions to the educational uplift of the state of Florida are very well known. For more than 20 years, he taught history at Florida A&M University, ultimately receiving the rank of Distinguished University Professor, one of only 2 on campus. Meanwhile, he held a series of administrative appointments leading to his selection in 2002 as Dean of the FAMU College of Arts and Sciences. In 2006, Dr. Rivers returned to his alma mater as the 8th president of Fort Valley State University. I learned from him today it was a promise he made years and years ago that he would always return back to his alma mater. The administrative and academic work that President Rivers has accomplished at Fort Valley has received national acclaim. Fort Valley students, faculty, and staff alike revere this man because they know that he's absolutely committed to the building of the beloved community of the mind in a socially engaged manner. If Bernie Matchin decides to retire as the president of the University of Florida, I will personally urge our trustees to hire this man. We really need him. There is so much more I could say about Dr. Rivers, but I now want to turn the podium over to him. So, dear friends, please join me in welcoming Dr. Larry Rivers.
Isn't it strange? Isn't it strange that princes and kings and clowns that caper in sawdust rings and common people like you and me, we are the builders for eternity. To each is given a bag of tools, a shapeless mask, and a book of rules. And each must make in our life a flown, whether we're going to be stumbling blocks or stepping stones. Isn't it strange? It's not strange that we're here this afternoon. For we're here this afternoon to talk about the history of a people. And in my new book, Rebels and Runaways, I talk about these common people, these ordinary people who did extraordinary things. And we're going to talk about that just a little bit. I have prepared a 2-hour presentation, but I will narrow it down to about 15 to 20 minutes, knowing that there are other things that we must. Give me a clap on it. Give it up. Give me a clap on that. Because if you don't clap, that means that you want me to give that 2-hour presentation. But before I start, I want to thank each of you for coming this afternoon, because I know you have a lot of other things that you could be doing, but you decided to come here this afternoon. This is a great city, Gainesville. The weather is fantastic, and we're here for the Claronelle, Smith, Griffin, Distinguished Speaker Series Banquet. My wife, after reading about Miss Griffin, loves Miss Griffin because she was one of her sorors, an AKA. We got excellent weather out there. I kind of did some extra hard praying. You know, I believe in prayer, because I believe prayer changes things. And it was raining when we were coming down here, but I said, Lord, let it shine. And he said, sometimes I'll grant what you ask for. I want to recognize some friends this afternoon. First and foremost, I want to recognize my friend for many years, Dr. Paul Ortiz, Associate Professor of History at the University of Florida. Paul has been a friend to me for a long time. When I read part of his book, which was published by the prestigious University of California Press, I was impressed that this young man was going places and will continue to go places. You don't know the treasure you have in this man. You know, I'm serious about this. I'm just not saying this to say this because I know some, and we're being taped here, but I don't care. I got some fellow colleagues who are historians who do an excellent job. They teach, they do their research, they go home. They don't really get involved as much in the activities of different historical societies. They don't push sometimes as much as I would diversity, because that's what makes this country great, diversity. But Paul does that. He spends a lot of time away from home working with people because he believes in humanity. He believes that people, knowing other people, can get along so that we will not have another Trayvon Martin situation in this country by coming together and working together and understanding that we are different, but that we love this great country. I don't know who's right or wrong in the Trayvon Martin case, but if we can all just, as what the guy in California said, if we can just all get along. It's about understanding diversity, understanding that people made contributions in their own way to this country. And we must look at individuals as individuals and not look at them for the color of their skin, but for the content of their character. That's what we're all about here. And I want to recognize my cousin, Jeanette Child King. Let's give them a round of applause. They knew I couldn't come to Gainesville without them showing up. And I want to thank Miss Barr. She really corresponded with me. She made sure that I was coming. She said I had turned her down a couple times. I always said I had something to do, but she kept shooting those emails till she finally got me. And I tell you, the presidents had to meet in Atlanta last night because we're raising funds for students in the university system of Georgia, and we didn't finish until about 11 o'clock. So Betty and I hurried the bid and got up this morning for a drive from Atlanta here, getting here about 2 o'clock or so, running to the bed and breakfast, doing what we needed to do to get here because we promised, right, Betty? We promised, right, Sarge? Sarge Bryant, my driver who protects me. And let me, because she has not been formally introduced, I'm probably going to say something to upset someone before I finish. So I want you to know where my wife is sitting so that if you get mad and you say something, she won't hear it because she's a staunch supporter of Larry and Rivers. Betty Jean, stand up so everybody know where you are, honey. Now, y'all been sitting for a little while. Stand up just for a second. If you can. If you can't, that's all right. Just stand up. Just for a while. Just everybody stand up for a quick second. If you don't stand up, I'm going to keep on asking you to stand. I see that last table back there. Everybody stand up. All right. Shake someone's hand. Just shake someone's hand. And now you can sit down. Now sit down. Sit down. That's what I like. I like, there you go. You can even hug somebody if you want to. Just give them a big hug. But you know, the real reason why I wanted y'all to stand up, y'all know the real reason why I wanted y'all to stand up. No matter what I say, when I go back to Georgia, they're going to ask me, there you go. I got a standing ovation. No matter what I say, I got a standing ovation. And I'll be telling the truth, Commissioner. I'll be telling the truth. Now let me get down to business. I mean, I've been here up here about 10 minutes already, and I haven't even gotten into my 3 hour, my 2 hour, my 1 hour, my 15-minute speech. Over 30 years ago, I came to Florida, and I looked around, and I didn't see a lot being written about the contributions that African Americans made to the development of Florida. And I would ask people about that. They say, well, if it was significant, if people did certain things, it would have been written down. If it's not written down, that means that it didn't happen, and that means that it's not that important. Well, I was really glad I didn't listen to that kind of advice. So, teaching 5 classes a semester at Florida A&M University, doing administrative work, I still plugged along to try to get my research out. And the first book that came out was entitled Slavery in Florida, Territorial Days to Emancipation. And what I tried to do with this book is to give enslaved Africans, enslaved blacks. You notice Paul said enslaved. You notice people say enslaved. And I use slave sometime and enslaved interchangeably. However, I normally say enslaved because many Africans did not want to be enslaved. They were enslaved against their will. Now, you had some on the plantation who were just slaves and would just do just about anything to get ahead. And I call those slaves. So when I use these interchangeably, don't get upset with me because they mean something different. This study is very important to the understanding of the diverse culture of this nation. And that's what we really need to know about. We need to know about the culture of different people. We need to understand that people made different contributions wherever they are, whoever they are. And it's about people understanding each other. Now, the people that I'm going to talk about for about 10 minutes were what many people call the inarticulate. They didn't write a lot. So how can you put together a story of these people? Well, you got to work hard to put that story together. But when you consider that prior to the Civil War, 48% of Florida's population consisted of enslaved, 48%, almost half consisted of enslaved African Americans. That's a large population to tell me that you can't find anything to write about their story. And I tried in the 2 books, Slavery in Florida, Rebels and Runaways, to tell the story from the perspective of the enslaved. What was their story like? What did they do? You know, a lot of times we think when someone writes a book, oh, here we go again, they're going to bash this, that, and the other. That was not the purpose. I wanted to see what life was like for the enslaved. And many of them ran away not for mistreatment. They ran away because they were in search of a family member who was sold to another plantation, sold to another state. I deal with a lot of things, but I wanted to see. And the thing that really puzzled me today, and I know I'm going to step on some toes, but the thing that really puzzles me today is that I go back when these individuals did not have sanctioned marriages, but they still considered themselves to be married. A man would run off to find his wife. A wife would run off miles to find a husband to gather a child. They believed in family, and today 75% of the children born in the African American community is born out of wedlock. Something is happening in this country from the time that we were enslaved to up to now. I mean, here you have enslaved people understanding the importance of family. Against all odds, running to find a loved one. I found numerous examples of that. And then we trace it on up now, and people just don't seem to care much about family anymore. Some of them use what I call the reversed Underground Railroad to seek freedom. Y'all all know, these great students from the University of Florida know about the reverse Underground Railroad, do you not? Well, I'm not going to ask you to stand up and tell me about it right now. But in my book, I talk about enslaved runaways who had an Atlantic world perspective. That meant that they understood that there was a world outside of Florida, that they were pilots, longshoremen. They worked the rivers of Jacksonville, the ports of Jacksonville, St. Augustine, Fernandino Beach, and on and on. And that they worked at these ports, and as black sailors and white sailors came in, they told them about other worlds. They told them about what was happening in Haiti. They told them what was happening in England. And 20%, and this is in my study, and I don't know what other studies talk, 20% of runaways in Florida used the waterways to make their escape to freedom. We always hear about, taking a horse, running by foot, getting caught, but these folk took boats. Some of them took small ships. Some of them went round and round in circles, but some of them got their freedom. I mean, we don't know how many runaways used the waterways of the South. What about this Atlantic world perspective? Satiki was one. And Patricia Griffin talks about Satiki. He was later named Jack Smith. But Satiki was taken from West Africa to South Carolina, from South Carolina to Connecticut, from Connecticut to St. Mary's, Georgia, from St. Mary's, Georgia to St. Augustine. He was able to experience so many things. He could talk to someone about what happened in Africa, what happened in Georgia. He had a perspective that was larger than just what was in St. Augustine, where he spent the most of his life. And if you knew Satiki, your world was much larger, because after slavery, he became an ordained minister, a teacher. And a lot of people knew him. To know him was to know what? The outside world. So a lot of Florida runaways did not want to move from Florida to Georgia. And now let's think about this. How many of us in high school have been taught about the reverse Underground Railroad? We talk about Ellen and William Craft, who got to Canada and then London. We hear about Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Henry Box Brown, and all of them leaving the South, heading to the North, to Boston, to Pennsylvania, even into Canada. But do we hear about this reverse Underground Railroad, this railroad that went further south? We don't read about that in our textbooks. Have we read that in our textbooks lately? Absolutely not. But if you, and I got one colored, see, if you get this book, plug for the book. If you get this book, you will know about the reverse Underground Railroad. And I hope that historians, those writing textbooks after reading my book, will revise this whole concept of the Underground Railroad. And let me explain what I mean by the reverse Underground Railroad. After 1834, particularly August 1st, 1834, the British outlawed slavery in their possessions. That meant that they outlawed slavery in the British Bahamas. How far would you say the Bahamas, the islands, are from Miami, Key Biscayne? A lot of runaways took boats and ended up after 18, I got numerous examples. In fact, there was a famous case in St. Augustine where they followed them. They 7 successfully got to Nassau, the Bahamas. The United States asked for them back. They were, the British outlawed, and they did not. The folk in Nassau did not send them back. They were free. And even after the Second Seminole War, a lot of runaways, rebels, ended up in St. Andrews Island as free people. But do you hear about the numerous? I wasn't as concerned about how many. I want these students from the University of Florida to tell me how many. But once you find 5, 6, 7, 8 cases, you say, I'm on to something here. You know, how widespread was this? But I just believe that we need to start looking at the reverse underground. Now, would it have made any sense, my friends, for a runaway to try to go from Florida to Georgia to South Carolina, North Carolina, all the way up through, when they could just commandeer a boat 100 and so miles and they in freedom? Nobody talks about that. But they had an Atlantic world perspective. They understood that there were other places besides trying to negotiate in the states where they could get free. We need to redo these history books. Include what Larry Rivers is saying. How about that? How about that? Now, Paul talked about this, but I really want to push this. I want to push this. You hear about slave rebellions. I did a lot of work on this, and when I'm talking about slave rebellions, I'm mentioning runaways. I'm simply talking about the agency, the desire for people to get their freedom. So many books have been written in the past, and most of them have been debunked, that suggest that enslaved Africans were comfortable with their lot. I did not find that to be the case. One thing that all human beings want that's universal is what? Freedom. It's not a matter of white, black, blue, or green. Every human being wants freedom. And so when the Second Seminole War started, many people called it an Indian war. I changed it and said, and I want some folk to challenge me on this. They said it was, I said it was a black Indian revolt. because I have traced where numerous enslaved blacks left the plantations in Alachua County. They left most places in northeast Florida. I can trace on the plantations where they left to the tune of 800. Now, there is a book out called American Uprising where they say that was the largest slave revolt in America in Louisiana in 1811, where 500. I would beg to differ. Now, why did they call it a Seminole War? Well, you got to think holistically about this. What else was happening in 1835 or the 1830s? That was a part of Andrew Jackson's Indian removal policies. So any disturbance was blamed on Native Americans. Plus, Florida and Oklahoma. Plus, if you said that there was a widespread revolt of 800 runaways and a slave revolt, that would have scared the heebie-jeebies out of folks. A rebellion? You know, so if you wanted to keep white settlers coming into Florida, you wanted to say Indian, because that was something that the average white settler had grown accustomed to during this era. But you start talking about something that came close to Nat Turner, Genmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, you had folks scared. So they deliberately misnamed it in order to keep it under control. I talk about that at length. And I talk about enslaved Africans from Alachua County, from Jacksonville, Duval County, all up and down the northeastern coastline. And my position is, anytime you have people who want their freedom, they're going to find a way to get it. Now, I also talk about the different levels of resistance, from what we call mild levels of resistance to the extreme violent forms of resistance. The majority of enslaved Africans in Florida did not run away, but they had what I call day-to-day resistance. And some of the owners wanted to be paternalistic, wanted to show that they cared, and sometimes enslaved blacks took advantage of that. A particular case in point where a lady in Leon County convinced her owner that she couldn't do very much work because she had to rely on crutches. So for 7 years, she relied on those crutches. But the minute the war was over, that is the Civil War, she should have gotten an Academy Award. I'm serious, because as soon as the war was over, she threw down those crutches. Now, this is from a former slave. I'm telling you what they observed. Walked out and told the owner she will never work for them a day in her life again because she's free. Now, I believe the owners were a little upset about that because they hadn't given her very much work to do because they thought she was crippled. So sometimes you got to inch out a little bit of freedom in a tough situation. And a lot of these, and I tell one story after another of the humanity of people. But what I wanted people to understand is that Florida was unlike any other southern state. In 30-year period, slavery grew at 297%, almost 300% over a 30-year period. Many times when people think of Florida, they think of Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and all the rest. This state was one of the last frontiers in terms of the growth of the institution of slavery. You could buy an acre of land for $1.25. And many owners from Virginia and Maryland brought their enslaved blacks to Florida in search of cheap land to grow staple crops. But the ironic thing in Virginia, white families were close. There was a high consciousness level. They believed in banding together. In fact, you heard of dueling back then. You said something against a family member, someone said you disrespected them, they hit you on the shoulder, next thing they say, I'm gonna duel you, when they go out and they pick their weapons of choice. You don't separate family, you do not talk about family, but the ironic thing about all this is that those families stayed together in search of making money by coming to Florida, but they separated the black families, leaving the elder parents in Maryland, Virginia, while they took the younger kids to make their way in Florida. A contradiction. Never thought about it. I deal with some hard, and it's not, this book is just not out bashing. It is dealing with realistic issues and dealing with the humanity of a people that we just don't know a whole lot about. And I believe if we knew about the humanity and what these individuals did to help make Florida and this country a great place in which to live, we wouldn't have all these racial problems and all this polarization that we have in this country today. We got to understand our history to understand that human beings are human beings. My daddy told me something that always stuck with me. He said, son, every white person you meet is not your enemy, and every black person you meet is not your friend. You got to deal with people on a one-on-one basis. And the one way you do that is to understand and learn about people. A lot of things are done through absolute ignorance. So that's what this history that I try to write is about. Just letting people know about other folk, their trials, their tribulations, and how they are part of the bigger picture. And when you do that, students at the University of Florida, you do it, never bleed the humanity out of any of your subjects. Make sure that people have a voice in what you're saying, that you give them a chance to express themselves, and that you continue to write about topics in Florida. For a while, nobody thought there was any history in Florida, although it's the 4th largest state in the union. How in the world can somebody tell me there's no history coming out of Florida? It's about understanding our diversity, embracing our diversity, and moving this great country forward. That's what this book is about. That's what my next book is going to be about. And whatever books I write, it's going to try to let people know and understand that we're all human beings, we all have differences, we all have a particular culture with that we understand, but at the end of the day, we are all human beings and citizens of these United States. Thank you all very much.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. As well, you deserve it, Dr. Rivers. Thank you. You've got something to take away with us.
Now,
Okay.
I just want to, so y'all know how my book looks. I got these covers here. I got enough for everybody. Take one so you'll know how it looks. From all the other books, you can go right to mine.
I want one.
It'll be out in June. Yeah, you're right. It's originally scheduled for July, but it's out in June. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the book is going to come out in June, and we've got leaflet of what the cover looks like,
And
and
if enough people buy it at one time, I will come back at my own expense and personally autograph every copy.
okay.
But you gotta have critical mass.
How many is enough?
At least 25.
Okay. 25 people buy the book at once. Dr. Rivers will come back and autograph. Okay, very good.